Here we go. Welcome to Ask Caleffi, the podcast that dives into real-life problems that plumbing and HVAC technicians face in the field. We're your hosts from the Caleffi Tech Support Team. I'm Greg Tubbs.
And I'm Dan Furcus. Welcome. We look forward to sharing some stories from our tech calls and using our background and expertise to make your days a little easier.
Hey there, welcome back. Here we are on episode 14. Today we're going to talk thermal balancing in domestic hot water systems. How we doing, Dan?
We're doing good. Thanks for coming back, everybody.
Yeah, thanks for tuning in. So, why would we use a thermal balancing valve in a domestic hot water system?
Well, that's exactly what they're designed for, Greg. Being thermostatic, they're thermostatically adjusted, so they provide automatic balancing of your recirc circuits.
Absolutely.
Kind of takes a little bit of the math out of it.
It certainly does. It takes a few things out of it, less labor involved, that really at the end of the day, you're not hooking up a meter to it to test your pressure differential across it.
Right.
It's there just to keep that loop hot.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you think about installing them, typically you're going to install them at the end or bottom of your riser so that it's controlling that riser temperature based on at the end points, knowing that all of the water in that riser is going to be up to temperature before it starts to modulate down.
Exactly. It confirms 100% that particular riser has hit its temperature, whatever it might be. So if you set this valve at 120, guess what? That whole riser has hit 120 degrees by the time it goes back to the end of the return to dump back into the main return.
Right. Yeah. And, you talk about, the whole preface of balancing is that water's lazy.
Right.
So it's going to take the path of least resistance. So with the thermostatic balancing, the advantage here is that, those risers that warm up quicker, they're going to be allowed to warm up. Once they come up to their design temperature, that valve's going to modulate down, which is going to create restriction and force that water in other directions.
Exactly. And that's what you need to do is them farther risers, there's more resistance to get there. So as soon as those closer risers to the mechanical room heat up, this guy will close them off and allow that water to push off.
Right.
Robbing Peter to pay Paul, but in a good way.
In a good way, right. And they never close off completely. No. They're always going to allow a little bit of flow through them, so it's always sampling the water temperature so that riser stays at temp and then will open up as it needs to.
Absolutely.
Another advantage, too, what I like about these is, think about a balancing valve. So you install it, and either you know the flow rate, so you're ordering the balancing valve preset for that flow rate.
Right.
Or you're putting in a manual balancing valve, which means you're coming back with a manometer or pressure differential tool, checking it, comparing it to your flow chart and balancing it. Or we have our quick setter, which makes it a little easier. With the thermal setter based on temperature, you can preset your temperatures on the ground, install it, and walk away, and it's set.
Absolutely. And it works great for trouble jobs, existing jobs where maybe there isn't any balancing. I don't know how many hotel calls I've taken, or maybe you have too, apartment buildings. Yep. There's a few, for instance, that come to mind. But, yeah, you know what? We don't get any flow to this end of the building. It's always cold. The legs are dead. Whatever the case may be, this valve is a problem solver for that kind of sickness.
Yeah, it sure is. And especially when you talk about those problem jobs, you ask them, well, what are you doing for balancing? And a lot of them, they don't know, or they're doing nothing.
You hear crickets.
Yeah.
Balancing? What's that?
Right. Or they have balancing valves in, but none of them are adjusted. They don't know if they've been adjusted or balanced, and odds are they probably aren't.
Yeah, and if they're the manual type with PT ports, let's be honest. I mean, you and me as techs in the field, we didn't really have that kind of equipment with us.
No, we didn't. And then when you look at as well, you don't know what you need through that. You don't know how long of a circuit it is. How are you going to balance that based on a flow rate? You don't know what's behind the drywall.
You don't. You have no clue how many elbows are back there.
So that's where you're right. Thermal setter is a problem solver. You're going to put it in, and once the temperature of that loop comes up to your set temperature, it's going to modulate down, and the water's going to go to the next. And you really don't need to know a whole lot more about it.
Right. These things will help save energy. you're looking at, especially if you're running it on a variable speed pump, as these things start to close off, that pump can now drop down in speed and consume less electricity.
Right. You look at all the municipalities out there that they talk about Aquastats in place because they want to control the pump, based on the temperature of the loop. So, the Aquastat is there to provide energy savings. Upgrading to a variable drive pump, usually a Delta P pump works the best. Putting in balancing valves, and then you get that energy savings without an Aquastat. Because face it, you and I know when you start looking and talking in a whole different direction, but you start looking at mixing valves, a lot of the time you're using your recirc pump to make up minimum flow rates. So you're not going to do that if you're shutting that pump off with an Aquastat.
No, you're certainly not. And then, they have to run more water out to get the heat there to get everything to work properly.
Right.
It's kind of brutal.
It is. The one thing too is, we talk a lot about thermal disinfection today.
Yeah.
And thermal disinfection, you're elevating your temperature in your system to kill Legionella. If we're using thermal setters, are we still going to be able to do that?
We certainly can. We have a couple other models available aside from the basic ones that you can either add the bypass cartridge, the thermal bypass cartridge, or you can use a 24-volt actuator that threads right on to drive that bypass,
right?
That bypass cartridge. So, and that can be tied into a building management system and be completely monitored.
Right. So we can. So you're saying we can provide thermal disinfection by by automatically opening the bypass cartridge with a thermoelectric actuator, or with a thermal bypass cartridge.
Exactly, thermostatically.
Yeah. One thing too is if you don't know if the building's going to do thermal disinfection or if they are going to come back later and possibly add it, we sell it with the bypass port just capped.
Right.
So it's there. You can add either the actuator or the thermal bypass cartridge later, so you don't have to make a decision right away. You can come back later and add that.
Absolutely, yeah. That's our 1161. So that's like the basic model with the ability to add either essentially a cartridge that's similar to what you'll find in our manifolds. Mm-hmm. It's just a pin type cartridge that pushes up and down, that opens and closes with the thermal actuator. That would be in our 1163 series.
Right. Or
you can get a cartridge, a bypass cartridge that's similar to what's in our 1162 and 1166 series, to where thermostatically it will go into bypass mode and allow that valve to work for thermal disinfection.
Yeah, once it sees that elevated temperature, it pops open and bypasses.
Right.
We have a couple of different temperatures available, 140 or 160 degrees for that bypass.
Absolutely.
And you can get them with check valves or without, and you can also get them with or without a temperature gauge.
Right.
But you guys, you think of those jobs that are real price sensitive. We do have a down and dirty option, our 1164, which is going to be just the thermostatic balancing valve. It's not going to have any bypass cartridge or the ability to add it later. But boy, when you're talking that price sensitive project where thermal disinfection isn't going to be a key or isn't going to come back and play a role later, that's a nice solution.
Yeah, it's the down and dirty thermal setter. It's very basic, like you said. How about maintenance of these things? Water quality always plays a role, right?
Absolutely.
We get that question all the time. Well, how long is it going to last? Well,
how often do I have to do maintenance?
Yeah. How hard is your water? How often are they being used?
Right.
Hotter water. I mean, obviously you're going to experience, if it's hard water and it's being kept really hot, you're going to probably see a shorter life on anything.
Right. Yeah. Or more maintenance requirement because you're going to get calcium to precipitate out of the water.
Right. And it'll build up on the walls of everything.
Right. But no, they're easy. I mean, as far as maintenance goes, you can jump in and you can pull the thermal cartridge out and clean it out.
Yeah.
Put it back in or replace it. We have replacement cartridges available. So, that's really nice because if you're out on a project and they've been in a long time and, you want to pull them out and clean them, or you find you need to replace them, maybe something's not working right, you don't have to cut the valve out and redo your piping and install an entirely new valve. You can just replace that thermostatic cartridge.
Yeah, and same goes with the bypass cartridges. They're replaceable if you can't get them cleaned properly, or you look at it and say, it's just going to be easier to replace it. We have the 140 and 160 degree bypass cartridges available as replacement parts.
We sure do.
And we also offer insulation shells too.
Yeah, we have an insulation shell. Makes insulating them very easy. Most of your domestic water recirc lines, you're going to want to insulate them to prevent losses, for energy efficiency. So we have a nice insulation shell that'll snap around. It'll still allow you to read the temperature gauge or make an adjustment.
Yeah. Well, what else could we cover with this?
Well, I think we hit on a lot. I think back to a call I received one time on a home.
Yeah.
And it was a large home. It was out in California, and the contractor was in there, and the home had, kind of like two wings to it. So it had a recirc line coming back from each direction, and he had a variable speed pump, and he had a mixing valve, and he was having issues with one side of the home, with balancing and with the mixing valve performing. And I remember talking with him. He did have a variable speed pump, but he had no balancing. So he had that recirc line came out in 3/4. It teed to 1/2 inch, went to each section of the home, but he had no way to know if it was balanced. So I know he came back and he put the thermal setter in, one on each one of those 1/2 inch lines, set them up, worked perfectly, took care of his problems.
That's awesome. And I think, memory serves correct, a couple of years back, right when this product kind of came to market for us, we had a job out in Colorado.
Yeah, I remember hearing about that.
Yeah, it was a large housing complex, a rather tall building, if memory serves correct. And they were having
an apartment building, wasn't it?
It was an apartment building, and they had a lot of problems with dead legs in that building. And I think Legionella might have been part of an issue too, somewhere along the line.
I think they had issues with. Yeah, I mean, I remember hearing stories about tenants there that would turn the water on, make breakfast, eat their breakfast, and then finally get back to the shower, and it still wasn't quite warm yet.
Wow. Yeah, that's pretty
And they
bad.
had recirc lines.
Yeah, they had recirc, but they had a lot of...
It just wasn't balanced.
No, it wasn't balanced, so you're trying to push all that many feet of head to overcome that resistance to get up there, and it's not happening. And if people on the lower levels are taking showers, they're getting everything right off the bat.
Yeah. So, if I remember right, they came back and they retrofitted the building with the thermal balancing valves, and it corrected all the issues.
It certainly did. It was kind of a win for us early on.
Yeah, a win for us, win for the contractor, win for the building owner, because I remember hearing at one point the Department of Health was called in.
Yeah, because they weren't getting hot water to where they needed it.
Right.
So a huge win for that building owner.
Absolutely.
Well, I think we covered this pretty well. So next week, I think we're going to talk on the Legio mix.
Yeah, that makes sense.
We get a ton of questions about that product, and it works really well with the thermosetter.
Yeah, it sure does. As far as the balancing aspect, the thermal setter is a great match with the Legio mix.
All right. Well, tune in next week. Thank you for tuning in. If you ever need help,
please feel free to contact our tech support team anytime at techsupport.us@caleffi.com.
or call us during our business hours at 7:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. Central Time at 414-238-2360.